just make me think, what else, what other cases could be judged like this?
Tonight, another juror breaks her silence.
What broke her heart the moment the verdict was announced? Plus,
they were by her side every step of the way. Tonight, Karen Reed's parents weighing in on what happened and what's next.
The jurors from the retrial of Karen Reed are starting to speak out. Good evening, everyone. I'm JC Monahan.
And I'm Glenn Jones. Tonight, we're hearing from a second juror who shared what it was like to decide Reed's fate. She spoke with our courtroom insider, Sue O'Connell.
What did you know about the Karen Reed case before you started hearing evidence?
I know she had a billboard on Route 1. Every time I go grocery shop, I see Free Karen Reed. That's all I knew about her and her name. I also saw some lounge that has signs Free Karen Reed, but didn't strike me to go search and understand what it was. So I had no clue what crime or what she did, who she was, who John was, nothing.
Who do you think did a good job on the defense side and for making the case, and who do you think didn't help or made it worse?
Dr. La Posada, for me, was very good, and the ARCA witness. I now know that they didn't want us to hear the ARCA professionals. They made it just clear and easy for a regular person like me to understand what really happened with data, with the videos, with the dummy, what the weight of the dummy. That discussion was so unnecessary.
How was your reaction to hearing the text messages former Trooper Proctor sent to his friends?
There was some wording that make me feel disgusted and upset. It's not that you don't have the same reaction if it was him reading. It's like just like Karen Reed and Brian Higgins text message. If it was him reading or her, it's not about who is reading, it's about the content. Okay, at that point when that friend came and read all the text messages, we already knew that Michael Proctor was a police officer who was fired, who was being accused of corruption or framed Karen Reed, whatever. So we already expect that something bad would come from this guy. So that's why I think you didn't see a shocking expression on our faces.
Talk to me about the reaction when the verdict was read and the crowd outside screamed and cheered.
To be honest with you, I don't remember what happened in that courtroom that day, that moment, because once I heard the people outside, I just closed my eyes and I started crying, and I left the courtroom without looking to anyone. I did not expect to hear it because through the whole trial, we didn't hear anything on a jury room. We did not saw many people outside because we come from the back of the courthouse. So we would see someone walk with a pink shirt here and there, but that was it. Never hear chanting or comments or laughing or yelling or booing, nothing. And it's particular to me when I heard that people screaming out of happiness. At the same time, I was seeing John O'Keefe's family crying out of sadness, and that broke my heart. So that moment, I kind of understood how big this case was and how we're making someone happy and we're making a lot of other people sad too. So I don't remember what happened in the courtroom that moment. I just closed my eyes and cried.
Sue is back with us tonight, along with defense attorney Morgietta Dourcier. Sue, what stood out to you the most about what Paula had to say?
How focused she said she and all the jurors were on the O'Keefe family and how they really felt very early into deliberation. She says that there was just not enough evidence to support the Commonwealth's claims that Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe and caused his death, and how the weight of how that was going to impact the O'Keefes, really like staring at them for 40 days while they were thinking about adjudicating this. It really stayed with her. And I think that her heartfelt expression, she was very careful, Paula was, not to speak for the other jurors, but she did say she felt this collective grief around having to deliver this verdict, which they believe was right and just, and also having to harm the O'Keefes.
So I was struck by her comments about hearing the hearing the people outside cheer after the jury delivered its verdict, which is so different from Ronald in the first trial, who told us during deliberations they could hear the people outside. So we know that them intentionally staying quiet made a difference between the deliberation process.
Yeah, it did indeed, and also because of the buffer zone and the way it worked in the beginning, and fewer people were there, and the way they came in, they never saw any of it or heard any of it. Remember, and Karen also and her team were not staying on site. They were at that church across the street. They were all the way over by Route 1. So every time Karen or her team came and went, there was no cheering. So I remember when the verdict was read and the cheer came up, I saw the jurors just look around like, what's going on? You know, and so when we talk about how could they find people who don't know anything about the case, or how can they not know what's going on outside, this is how justice gets done.
Morgietta, what did you think of what this juror had to say?
I think the best thing about what she said is how seriously you could tell all the jurors took this case. And everyone said, how are they going to not know? How are they not going to Google? But they went to that room and they knew that they had a job to accomplish, and that was to take the evidence in, analyze it based upon what they saw in the courtroom, what they heard over the last 40 days, and make a decision. And you can even tell that they're smart, they paid attention, some took notes, some didn't, but this is how jury systems are supposed to work. So I think it's really refreshing to know that this juror and the other juror that came out, and I'm sure all of them, took their job very seriously.
Many trial watchers found the testimony of Boston police officer Kelly Dever fascinating, even shocking. Turns out Paula felt the same way.
Officer Dever was scary, to say the least. She sold a vibe of being so desperate and angry to everyone, like a child complaining and fighting with their mom. I mean, I just feel like unsafe to have a person with that level of immaturity carrying a gun among us.
Dever took the stand on June 2nd, you might remember. She was a defense witness. At the time of Reed's arrest, she worked as a police officer in Canton. On the stand, she was resistant, almost hostile at times, and often answered with long silences. She even said she didn't know why she was called to testify in the first place.
You've never talked to me. Nobody on the fence seems to talk to me since prior to the first trial. So I don't have any idea why I'm here.
Clearly, Dever's testimony did very little to restore faith in law enforcement. Morgietta, I wonder if that is precisely the reason the defense called this witness, to continue this narrative about bad cops, because if that was the case, it seems as if it worked, at least with Paula.
So I'm going to be honest. I don't think they thought that she was going to be that way on the stand, because remember that day they went to a sidebar really, really quickly and asked Judge Cannoni to treat her as a hostile witness. But as great defense attorneys, they turned that around really quickly, and clearly the jury could see, okay, this person is starting to do something that I don't think anybody planned for her to do. But you're right. It went directly to the narrative of, we talked about the blue wall, and she clearly conveyed that in her stance, not only in what she said, but how she said it. She said she was trying to protect her career. So that message got loud and clear. And they were already talking about a conspiracy and what the police did and didn't do. So it only furthered that narrative.
Of course, that witness was recanting a story about Chief Berkowitz and Higgins being in the Sally Port.
Do you remember any reaction in the courtroom when Devers was on the stand?
Yeah, I wasn't in the courtroom that day, but my colleagues who were there said it was, remember, she was very early in the defense's case, right? So it was the first really stressful testimony of a defense witness, because former Trooper Proctor's friend was up and had read the text messages, but had been very easygoing about it, said he didn't want to do it, but was respectful and polite. And then a police officer gets up, and they said it was just very, you could see the jury just wondering what this witness was doing for the defense and why this police officer was being so oppositional.
All right, and we also heard about comments from this juror on the testimony from State Police Sergeant Yuri Buchanan. You may remember Sergeant Buchanan testified for 3 days last month. Most of it was under cross-examination. As a key investigator in the case, Buchanan was asked repeatedly about the integrity of the police investigation. So it turns out the juror, Paula, sat fairly close to that witness stand, and she did notice something.
Sometimes I could see him like making a fist, and he was really uncomfortable with some questions. Felt to me that he was very protective of his job and his colleagues. He's probably like a good representative of the blue wall.
Okay, the blue wall, you just heard, and Morgietta, you just brought up the blue wall, this idea that officers are going to protect their own, even if there's some misdeed or misconduct. about it. What did her assessment say to you?
I think it said what a lot of people have said throughout this case is that when you're looking at a murder investigation, you have to have the key players doing their job. We had the neighbor across the street who had the Ring camera who was an officer. The person who owned the home where the body was found was an officer. And now you have officers throughout this trial who are visibly, disturbed by some of the simple questions that they were being asked. When we look at the other experts testifying, even one of the experts that had the misstep with his resume, I mean, he owned up to it. It wasn't great, but he didn't really. Sharon Burgess. He didn't really, clench his fist. He was just like, "Yep, it's a lie. There it is. It is what it is." But you have someone who's visibly combative, and you have somebody who's making faces and fists. The jury's going to read right through that, and then you have the defense weaving in conspiracy. Police officers not doing their job, reasonable doubt. It all just kind of ties in.
Plenty of questions for Buchanan centered around Michael Proctor, the lead investigator and now former state police trooper. But Proctor never took the stand in the second trial. That's something Paula noticed but didn't mind.
I didn't mind not seeing him because he was already fired, and everybody else did a good job of bringing his role in the investigation to us.
This one is really interesting, Sue, because so many of our legal analysts thought it was a mistake not to call Michael Proctor. At least in this situation right here, it seemed not to have a negative impact.
Well, no. What she said later on, too, is she just kept writing down Proctor, Proctor, Proctor. And then she's like, where is this guy? Why am I writing down his name? And then when she found out that he was fired and it was related to the case, everything that had Proctor's name next to it then came into question. So not having him testify again, we'll never know. If he came on, maybe he could have redeemed himself or the defense would have had a second shot at him. But he was associated as something bad. His name was, and it was all throughout her notebook.
Morgiana, this leads us to a viewer question we want to get to about Proctor. Richard from Belchertown wants to know, can Michael Proctor hire an attorney and try to overturn his dismissal from the Commonwealth State Troopers Department? In case you missed it, in last night's Dateline, it focused on the Karen Reed case. They spoke with Proctor, who you see there, who says he wants his job back. What do you think, Morgiana?
I think he should have an attorney just on retainer, because this is something that's definitely not going to be going away. And I'm sure as he's doing these interviews, he's getting advice from legal counsel. But I mean, if he is going to try to get back his job, it's going to be really difficult, because what we're talking about here is not so much all the text messages, but it's the way the investigation was conducted and the duties that he was sworn to uphold and whether or not he breached those duties. And I think based upon what we've seen in trial 1 and all the information that came out in trial 2, there was a breach of that duty, and that duty was to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And how do you overturn that? It's going to be really difficult when this is a live, public trial where the information is right there, So it's
not the only trial that.
And not the only trial, exactly.
All right, Morgiana, Sue, don't go anywhere. We are hearing from Karen Reed's parents after the break.
This is Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial. Karen Reed has been acquitted in the murder of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe.
Nobody covers the Karen Reed trial like NBC 10 Boston.
I could not be standing here without these amazing supporters.
In the courtroom and outside the courthouse.
This is nothing like we saw in the first trial.
It's not a television show. It's real life.
Unmatched team coverage.
There really is nothing typical when it comes to this case.
Every major story, we're on it. NBC 10 Boston. News worthy of you.
2 days after Karen Reed was acquitted in the murder of her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, Karen Reed's parents are talking to us about the aftermath of the trial.
They sat down with our Eli Rosenberg today.
For the parents of Karen Reed, there has not been much time for reflection. But already, some things are becoming evident.
I don't know what will become of our lives. I don't think we'll ever go back to where we were prior to January 29th, 2022.
The events of the past few days have finally sunk in. The legal war they waged and helped finance on behalf of their daughter, Karen Reed, starting to become a memory.
Whatever you didn't think could happen, happened. Like every day somebody go, what's going on? This is crazy. I've never seen that in a case before. Those were things, it was always like a shock. It never went smooth.
But one thing is certain, they say. they are filled with gratitude for the outcome of Reed's second trial for sure, but also for those they met along the way.
We always say after we've met a lot of people that we don't know if we could do what they did for us. But now I think I could, because I know what it meant to us, and if I could do that for somebody else.
Also remembered, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, who died on January 29, 2022. At the time, O'Keefe and Reed were dating. Reed's acquittal on charges related to his death only leading to more questions about what happened. O'Keefe's family declining to speak on Thursday when an NBC 10 reporter stopped by, saying there will be a time for that. The time, just not now. Reed's family also trying to ensure some good comes out of the toll of the last 3 years.
To avoid this happening to your loved one, your significant person in your life, and it can happen to anyone, take back your government. Get out there and vote. That's your power. Don't let there be another Karen Reed down the road.
And they went on to say their daughter, Karen Reed, remains in a hotel room up in Boston trying to figure out what's next, and if that what's next includes remaining here in New England after everything that has happened. In Canton, Eli Rosenberg, NBC 10 Boston.
Back with us now is Morgietta and Sue. We know this case cannot be tried again, but it also leads to lingering questions for those who believe that Karen Reed is innocent. Then can it be reopened? Can they look for new evidence so that they could try to find an answer to this?
That's an absolute no. If I were the district attorney in Norfolk County, I would let this one go for a couple of reasons. Number one, you already spent almost $2 million, I think I heard, retrying and trying the first trial. And secondly, any good lawyer who gets a client who is now being charged with all the overwhelming evidence in the first two trials is going to have a really, really streamlined job showing that there was somebody else that was tried and charged, and the Commonwealth lost twice. So you really have to just cut your losses with this one. And it's sad because the O'Keefe family honestly may never know what happened to their loved one, but I think it's a hard no to try to get more evidence.
And all the same problems exist, right? If they get new evidence, if they have someone who comes forward and admits something, they still have the problems with the investigation in the first days of the case. So let's say they arrest John Smith and they charge John Smith, and John Smith's lawyer goes, well, they didn't go in the house. You know, right. There's just nowhere to go with this, and it's a tragedy.
To put it mildly, District Attorney Morrissey is going to have a difficult re-election. Is there any way he can overcome these challenges if he decides to run again?
I find it hard to believe. I've said this in the first trial. I said it this time. I keep meeting people who are very involved in this case who didn't know that they elected their district attorney. They didn't know it was an elective office. Okay, now lots of people know. So I think that's good news for our justice system. We'll have to see how the news turns out for District Attorney Morrissey.
Well, once again, just like last night, it has been difficult to hear anything of substance from the district attorney whose office prosecuted this murder case.
NBC 10 investigator Ryan Cath has been trying to get a comment from the elected officials we've been talking about. He spoke to two candidates who are now vying for his job.
Since Wednesday's dramatic verdict, there has been no response from District Attorney Michael Morrissey, the person who decided to move forward with a second trial against Karen Reed.
His lack of transparency has completely undermined the community's trust.
That's one of the main reasons Juna Perkins is making a run for Norfolk County DA. Perkins, a former prosecutor and trial attorney of 30 years who lives a mile from the courthouse in Dedham, called it unethical to continue pursuing murder charges and not learn any lessons from the first trial.
I think the worst thing about this case and what the district attorney's office did is that it told the family of John O'Keefe that they could expect a murder conviction. Giving them false hope may put them through this experience that is emotionally devastating.
Craig McClellan is also challenging Morrissey for the DA's seat. What is your reaction to that silence?
He is inaccessible and invisible. And as I've said before, it's just never going to lead to good government. So the fact that he's essentially in hiding right now is completely unacceptable.
McClellan, a former prosecutor and now a criminal defense attorney in Cohasset, says Morrissey should explain to taxpayers why he decided to bring in special prosecutor Hank Brennan for the second trial. As the NBC 10 investigators reported, financial records show Brennan stands to make more than $500,000 in compensation for the case. When McClellan points out there are already veteran prosecutors paid six-figure salaries in the DA's office.
To me, it didn't make a great deal of fiscal sense, and it's cost the taxpayers a huge amount of money. And I don't see the wisdom in it.
What was your reaction to seeing some of the results?
I thought the results in here were astounding.
On the night of the verdict, Brian Wynn of Opinion Diagnostics sent out a survey by text to thousands of eligible jurors in Norfolk County. Out of the roughly 1,100 responses, this was the most staggering result. Only 4% of those people answered that Morrissey deserves to be reelected.
And these were by far the worst numbers I had ever seen for any elected official I've ever polled.
Today, reporters asked Governor Healy about whether the public should expect to hear from the DA after a case like this, and she declined to comment. Morrissey was first elected to DA in 2010 and is now serving his fourth term. It's still unclear if he plans to run for a fifth next year, but as you just heard, it would be an understatement to say he's facing some political headwinds. Ryan Kath, NBC 10 Investigators.
Okay, so given that we're hearing people want to hear from the DA, Morgietta, it seems like no matter what statement he put out, it's a no-win situation.
But he should put out a statement, right? Or more than what he's done so far, because not only does the family deserve that, but the people of the Commonwealth deserve that as well. We have to remember that it's the Commonwealth's choice, meaning the district attorney's choice, to move forward with the case, even if the grand jury sits and votes what's called a true bill, which is how the case gets put together and moves forward. He's the one that decides, yes, let's move forward with this, change the charges maybe, add a lesser included offense. But that didn't happen. And so I think it's unfortunate that at this point, it's been 2 days. We've already heard from everybody else.
Including the state police.
Including the state police, but not from him.
All right. There's a seat available at this table for the DA should he choose to accept it.
Indeed.
Morgietta, Sue, thanks very much for joining us. And thanks to all of you for joining us as well and sticking with us throughout this journey. I'm Glenn Jones.
And I'm JC Monahan. This is Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial.